Mufti, why were promiscuous women looked down upon throughout history, in your opinion? Is there an evolutionary explanation for that? Promiscuous women. I'm not sure promiscuous women. Promiscuous women. I'm not even the term is right. So, because I don't like that term in that sense, because I think it's part of the problem. Um, if we're going to say um, embracing one's sexuality, I think in the past wasn't looked down upon. I think women openly, if you went back many thousands of years, they did openly embrace sexuality. Hence, a lot of the goddesses of ancient cultures and things like that are goddesses that are often sexual deities. Because how could that be um, archetyped and symbolized as something in those ancient civilizations as worthy of kind of this worship if it was seen as something abhorrent? So I refuse. I don't believe that. In many, if you went several thousands of years ago, I feel that they would have openly embraced. But I think in the last, maybe between last few thousand years only, that this culture has started to dominate, and I think actually maybe yeah. So yeah, it started to dominate, and then it has kind of become the way, especially leading into what would have become, I think, a lot of Christianity ended up because of, and I'm not saying it's because of Christianity at its core, but Christendom really took on this thing of denying sexuality, and then obviously uh neighboring cultures, and I don't know whether they influence one another or did they develop in parallel, because sometimes people can just develop in parallel similar ideas. So yeah, so certain Muslim cultures embrace this view as well. Others didn't, to be fair. But over time, this view seems to have preponderated. So if you look at ancient India, it was still very embracing of sexuality before the British really take hold of India. So even when the British are there in the early days, but they haven't completely taken over. It's just the East India Company there. India is still quite different. And you have to remember that they have this whole thing. They have this culture. They have even the Hindu indigenous people with Kama Sutra being this whole thing of the sexual energy being something that one can attain samadhi through that, and this whole you can attain this blissful state of um, bringing you closer to God is through meaningful and powerfully charged sex. That was often in many cultures deemed to be one of the most powerful ways, and you see echoes of that in the Muslim culture as well, like Imam Ghazali speaking of the ecstasy of the orgasm is bestowed. It's really a property from the realm of the afterlife, which is kind of granted in this dunya. And you can see in many ways the afterlife a place of greater proximity to the divine. So how through this ecstatic orgasmic state one can be, or at least experience or taste a um a a sense of transcendental proximity. I feel that these things were there, but it's kind of died down with the whole, um, yeah, with colonialism. It really took a beating and really died a horrible death. And yeah, so and even that's whether it was Muslims or non-Muslims, they seem to have adopted this prudish kind of ethics which look down on this. So I think that's a an anthropological development, culturally speaking, that cultures have been through that. Not just, it's nothing to do with, and I think why they look down on women was, maybe it was as a sense of control. It was a fear that people had. Because ultimately, from an evolutionary perspective, it was more about just wanting to know the progeny, the child is this. This was where men would have that, from an evolutionary perspective, that sense of control or that fear. As you, so if the woman is restricted, then obviously, or the more control that you have, it is, it kind of gives you more, let's say, a surety of your progeny. So if this is, we're looking at it from an evolution perspective. And then I think society, when that kind of plays out and manifests at a societal level, it builds on the concept of shame and shaming someone for being sexual. And it's a true shame that this exists in Muslim culture, in some Muslim cultures. I spoke to I spoke to someone, this lady who was asking me for some advice, and she had been through a terrible relationship. May Allah make it easy for her, for everyone who faces these kind of horrific chains of abuse. So she wanted a divorce, and this is, by the way, this is a God-given. This is haq. This is something which a person, if they are in a relationship that they are suffering in, it is their right in Islam, that you can't force these people to be in a relationship if they don't want to be in it, even if they did want to be in it 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 5 years ago. But if today they don't want to be in it, even if it's because they're being stupid, it's still their life, their choice. You have to accept it. So this lady, she was in a relationship for so long, and she just kind of just put up with it, I guess. And eventually she couldn't. It got to that point. So she was about, I think she was 50 years old or in her early 50s, and she was seeking a divorce. So she went to some masjid, um, and to ask for assistance on this matter. And she wanted to apply for a khula'a or for a talaq, and she wanted some guidance. And the imams, really, honestly, because it's so horrendous, the reaction, because they said, to see, their point was that, and I could understand if they were just trying to come from the angle of, I mean, Allahu A'lam, if that was their angle, then it was a horrible manifestation of it. That if, because somebody could tell you this problem, and maybe you could say, well, you know what, I don't, because you don't know how bad it is, and you could say, look, maybe do you want, maybe counseling could work, maybe reconciliation, maybe you're trying to say, look, maybe keeping a home together, and these are all noble intentions, and it's coming from a place of love, so that's admirable. But if a person is suffering and they're saying, look, this is what they want, then it's their life. And so they said to her that, look, why do you want a divorce? Because look, you're already 50, whatever it was, like, let's say she was 52, and they said, like, you're already in your 50s, and you, what, do you want another man? And it's not going to be that long before you're in the grave. And I thought, what the hell? What the hell? Ya salam. That is such a horrible thing to say. That is absolute bang out of order. You have no place on earth, that there is no place in Islam for anybody to say that to somebody. You see, so it doesn't matter if she's 70 years old, she's 80 years old, she's 100. It's still her life. And to impose a kind of social guilt upon her, to say, well, what do you want? Another man? Like, wait a minute, back it up a bit. It's not your place to even ask that. What has it got to do with you? What is this social guilt and shame that you are trying to put onto her? First of all, whether she wants a man or she doesn't, that's nobody's business. But even if, what's wrong with that? Like, why are people being put to shame over just being humans? It's like, oh, so and in this case, that wasn't even the reason. The woman had been in an abusive relationship. But even if that was a reason, what's wrong with wanting companionship, with wanting intimacy, with wanting with wanting sex? What's wrong with that? So to kind of impose it from a religious perspective with a sense of guilt, not even a tablespoon, but like a bucket of guilt in there. That is this what you want? And look at your age. You ain't you going to the grave? I mean, what the hell? I honestly, I heard it and I was, like secondhand hurt by hearing it. I was like, who on earth said that? So we have to be careful as well when we speak about the deen to people, because you're not allowed to say things like this. Okay. And we are not the gatekeepers of the deen. This is Allah's deen. And we're not, and secondly, this attitude of shame towards what is just very human and creature is the fitrah that Allah has created creatures with. Well, why should you be ashamed? تلك فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها. Why should you be ashamed? That's like saying you should be ashamed of God. So there is great responsibility in these things, and we have to accept that, look, other people live their own lives. Sometimes, people have said to me sometimes, oh, Mufti, I know such and such person, they want a divorce, but they're doing it for all the wrong reasons. So what? It's their life. They have to learn by their own mistakes. What that's like, if a person says, look, I want to get married to this person, and somebody says, well, yeah, that's a recipe for disaster. And it may well be a recipe for disaster. It may well be. But it's still their life. They've got somebody says, look, I'm going to take this job. You say, well, yeah, I wouldn't recommend that place. Or somebody says something else stupid in life. I'm going to do something which is actually stupid. It's going to get them into trouble, let's say. Or they're going to do something. But it's their life and it's their mistakes to make. Especially when they're legitimate choices. Even if they are foolish. Even if it's still their life. And we have to respect that. And people have to always say, you could say, well, if they ask your opinion, in my opinion, but it's your life. So may Allah make things easy for everyone who is suffering. Ameen. And, and really, may we be able to have a compassionate bond with this deen in its very natural fitrah state. Because it's amazingly, mesmerizingly beautiful in its natural state. Right. Maryam, what about promiscuous men? Exactly. That was the point.